Hello, happy Halloween and welcome to episode 36 of Within the Boggart Wood. Is anyone up to anything for Halloween this year? I've had a quiet one myself, barring going to a talk on Haunted Tyneside by Dr. Icy Sedgwick earlier this week. Now you may notice that my couple of weeks break from the podcast kind of extended a little longer than planned, to what appears to be nearly 6 months, and I can only apologise and thank everyone who's taken the time to contact me and ask if I'm still alive. Obviously, as it's now Halloween, I would say I'm erring on the undead side rather than the alive side, but suffice to say I now understand the old curse of may you live in interesting times. As discussed back at the beginning of year 3, moving forward I'm probably going to be going more with bite-sized episodes as the podcast continues. There'll also be more video content upcoming, but the Within the Boggart Wood website has now been updated with a most recent section on the homepage. So if you visit that, you can see what the most recent 3 updates in any format are at any given time. At the time of writing this episode, the most recent updates are some video clips from June, when myself and Andy from Walking with the Ghost of Durham undertook an anomalous phenomena investigation at the Lanchester Community Centre in County Durham. Now a full video episode of the investigation will be released soon. The clips you can see on the website are some recreations we did of some of the rather dodgy alleged paranormal evidence that had been hitting the paranormal community back in May. They're only small clips, let me know if you enjoy them. But without further ado, let's crack on with the episode. So a couple of weeks ago I was working up in a little village called Holystone in Northumberland, and part of the research for the job in question meant looking at any known archaeological sites within a kilometre of the site of interest. One of the sites mentioned pushed me to crack on with this episode, which I'm simply calling the Lady's Well. Holystone is a lovely little Northumbrian village set by the River Coquet, only 5 miles to the northwest of the Simonside Hills, said in local folklore to be home to the dark and cruel Dvergar. I covered the legend of the Simonside Dwarfs back in episode 3 for those interested in having a listen to the tale. The land around Holystone holds a number of prehistoric monuments, including Bronze Age round cairns found to contain human remains when excavated in the 19th century, a Bronze Age dyke between Dove Crag and Holystone Burn, and an Iron Age hill fort. Recent surveys have also found an undated enclosure, though its form suggests either an Iron Age or maybe Romano-British date. Certainly, the Romans also impacted on the area, with a stretch of Roman road noting to cut through the Bronze Age dyke previously mentioned, running north-east-southwest through the northwest side of the village. The road ran between High Rochester and Learchild for a distance of some 20 miles. In the area of what is now Holystone, it appears that the Romans also set a waypoint in the form of a large stone tank, measuring 13 metres by 7.8 metres, fed by a natural spring. It's assumed that this was a halting place along the road to allow horses and their owners a welcome drink, and may also suggest that there's an unrecorded Roman settlement somewhere in the vicinity of the roadside. In the late 4th and 5th century, a shadowy figure emerged in Northumbrian and Scottish history, later to be known as St Ninian. Ninian was a missionary recognised as perhaps Scotland's first saint. He travelled Scotland and Northumbria, and it is said that he visited the site of the Roman watering hole and consecrated it, whereupon it is said it became known as St Ninian's Well. When Ninian died, he was buried at Whithorn, some 160 miles to the west of Holystone, in what is now Dumfries and Galloway, with his shrine becoming the focus of pilgrimage from the 7th century, as it was said to be a place of healing, where sicknesses would be cured and miracles occurred. Staying in the 7th century, but back at Holystone, there's a folk tale that in the year 627, Bishop Paulinus of York baptised, all in one day, King Edwin of Northumbria and 3,000 people in the waters of St Ninian's Well. Paulinus is described as a Gregorian missionary and the first Bishop of York. He was sent to Britain in the year 604 by Pope Gregory I to aid in the Christianisation of the Anglo-Saxons. It is thought that he spent a fair few years in Northumbria after converting King Edwin of Northumbria to Christianity. The tale of the bishop baptising the king and 3,000 men at Holystone unfortunately appears to be only a misreading of the works of the Venerable Bede, who stated that the baptism occurred at Sancta Petra, which translates from the Latin to Holy Stone. It is now believed, though, that this actually referred to St. Peter's Church in York. Fast forward now to the 12th century. Around a quarter of a mile to the southeast of St. Ninian's Well, an Augustinian nunnery and priory had been founded. We don't know exactly when or by whom, but a petition from the nuns to the King of England strongly suggests that it was built between AD 1107 and 1124, possibly the work of Odinel de Umfreville. In the year 1312, it is recorded that the nunnery had been reduced to a state of poverty due to the border wars between England and Scotland. In an attempt to aid the convent, they were granted a chapel at nearby Harbottle and a church at Corsonside, and then in 1375 they were endowed a church at Alwinton. However, in the year 1535 the yearly revenue for the nunnery was only £11, 5 shillings and 7 pence, which placed the nuns squarely within Henry VIII's clause to allow the religious house to be dissolved if it had an income of less than £200. In line with this, the nunnery became a victim of the dissolution in 1539, and the buildings were demolished in 1541 to provide stone for repair work at nearby Harbottle Castle. Some of the stonework didn't make it across to Harbottle and still remains built into some of the houses and buildings in the village today. But what of St. Ninian's Well during this period? Not a lot is known, but it seems to have been maintained. Some say that it gained the name Ladies' Well during this period, with its association with the nuns. By the beginning of the 18th century, however, the well was described as ruinous, with the Roman tank noted to measure 42 by 21 feet, surrounded by the remains of a collapsed stone wall. At the east end of the well was a stone, said to be the Holystone which had given the village its name, and also said to be the same stone on which Bishop Paulinus had knelt in the year 627. The well had also gained a reputation for holding healing properties, potentially due to its association with both Paulinus and St. Ninian, with many folk visiting in the hope that the waters could cure illness and injury. In 1780 the tank was repaired, the walls rebuilt, and a stone statue, thought potentially to be 15th century in date, was brought in from Alnwick in 1788. The statue was that of the Bishop Paulinus, and it was originally set in the centre of the tank on a stone plinth. In the mid-19th century, however, the statue was then removed from the pool and set on the west side of the well, replaced in the centre by a stone wheel cross on which was written, "In this place Paulinus the Bishop baptised 3,000 Northumbrians, Easter 627. In 1904, St. Ninian's Well had a very brief mention in County Folklore Volume 9, collected by M.C. Balfour. It simply reads, "Dr. Empleton informs me he has formerly noticed many pins lying at the bottom." And in 1916, C.J. Hodgson recorded a visit to Holystone in Archaeologia Aeliana. Holystone. At present there is nothing to be seen of the nunnery but the rubbish of the walls overgrown with grass, and the little church is sunk so deep in the ground that the tops of the doors are almost level with the surface of the earth, and so out of repair that the parson has only a heap of stones for a pulpit. It is preached at quarterly by the vicar. By 1957 the Holy Stone itself had vanished from the well, and it was noted that the well was no longer seen as a healing well, but instead a wishing well, with visitors throwing crooked pins and pennies into the waters in their hopes that their wishes could come true. It was also noted that by this time the well was in the custodianship of the National Trust, and that the waters of the well were also being piped away to provide water for the village itself. In 1997, archaeological monitoring took place at the well during National Trust works to clear the silt from the tank. Coins and what is noted as New Age offerings were retrieved from the silt. Further monitoring took place in 2023 during repairs on the boundary wall, but nothing of significance was found. Looking at old maps, the well was known as Ladies' Well certainly from the mid-1800s through to the late 20th century, with the name St. Ninian's Well returning for the modern Ordnance Survey mapping. The name Ladies' Well is still used on the signposts in the village, allowing visitors to easily find the site. This episode from the Archives section has a twofold purpose. One, to tell a spooky tale this Halloween, but also to ask a question. The article, titled True Ghost Stories, was told in the 19th of March 1911 edition of the London Weekly Dispatch, and tells tales of ghostly grey monks and a skeletal lady set in Basque Abbey near Durham. Now, I've never heard of Basque Abbey, so the question to you, my Boggarty listeners, is if you know a bit of County Durham history, have you heard of Basque Abbey being referenced before? I personally think that while the title is True Ghost Stories, the names used in the story, including places, appear to have been changed for fictitious ones, and I think that the story may simply be alluding to Finkel Abbey. But if any of you know differently, I'd love to hear about it. True Ghost Stories number 7, The Grey-Hooded Monks and Skeleton Woman of Basque Abbey by Elliot O'Donnell. Basque Abbey, near Durham, was for many years haunted by the phantoms of 2 grey-hooded monks and the long-haired skeleton of a woman. One day in January I was the recipient of the following telegram from Miss South, a friend of many years' standing. Basque Abbey near here badly haunted. Come at once. Of course I obeyed. Everyone obeys Miss South. Her power is paramount, and where the psychic is concerned, her instinct and judgment alike never err. I received her wire at 10 a.m. At 11:30 I was at St Pancras. At 9:40, Durham. I slept the night at a small inn close to the Royal County Hotel in the Great North Road, and early the next morning met Miss South by appointment at Basque Abbey. What she was dressed in I haven't the faintest idea. I only know that she was not wearing one of those ridiculous bobble skirts and monstrous mushroom hats that find such favour with the nouveau riche, particularly in the suburbs, but a style of dress that was exceedingly becoming and in strict accordance with good form. She was accompanied by a demure chaperone who she addressed as Miss Drew, and we entered the Abbey grounds together. The Abbey itself, though old, either the 12th or 13th century, was in an excellent state of repair, and until quite recently had been inhabited by a Mr. and Mrs. McRae, friends of Miss South. Passing in through the iron gates, we found ourselves on a broad path paved with flagstones, and on each side of us, at intervals, were clumps of trees, fountains, and statuary. The latter, for the most part of antique and monkish design, portrayed hooded figures, either clasping books or kneeling in the attitude of prayer or bestowing benedictions, and it came upon me with somewhat of a shock to see, amid all this work of bygone ages, the frivolous figure of a Grecian lady by Baines. This statue, sculptured by a comparatively modern master, confronted, with all the bold assurance of grace, beauty, and scant clothing, 2 tall stern-visaged monks, on whom it smiled with the most bewitching coquetry. It was 11 o'clock and the sky cloudless, but whereas the rays of the sun shone superbly on everything else, they studiously avoided this maiden, an omission sufficient in itself to rivet my attention. But this was not all. The atmosphere within a certain radius of the statue was freezing, and, to a degree unequalled in any other spot, tainted with the smell of the charnel house. I threw myself in the direct line of the maiden's gaze, and as my eyes rested on her stony pupils, those pupils suddenly became animate, and for one brief second, for the shortest possible fraction of time, I saw a soul, the soul of a woman, earthbound and bestial. I turned to my companions. They were regarding me curiously. "Do you know when this statue was put here?" I asked. "Do you?" Miss South repeated, looking at her friend. Miss Drew nodded. "Yes," she said, "it was brought and placed here the year Lady Ogilvy, I mean, of course, the second Lady Ogilvy died." "Does Mr. O'Donnell know anything about the Abbey or the Ogilvys?" "He knows nothing of either," Miss South replied. "I want you to tell him." "Until the time of Henry VIII, Miss Drew began, the Abbey belonged to the Franciscan monks, but when the monasteries were suppressed, it was taken from them and given to the Ogilvys, who kept it ever since. The late Lord Ogilvy married twice, and his second wife, who died shortly after the statue was brought to the Abbey, was the daughter of Robert Steins, the famous Wall Street banker, and gained considerable notoriety both on the American and English stage. When I tell you that she had been divorced at least twice before she met Lord Ogilvy, you may perhaps form some idea of what she was like. I saw her directly after her marriage with Lord Ogilvy, when she was supposed to be at the very zenith of her beauty, but I cannot say I admired her even then. Although I met her many times afterwards, my acquaintance with her was not destined to be that of long duration, for she died when still a young woman. She rode with the hounds, astride of course, till within a month of her death. She always drank heavily, and her language," here Miss Drew made an expressive gesture with her hands, "was sublime. Besides this, her effrontery knew no limits. She was insolent to everyone, but especially to the clergy, for whose annoyance it was partly that she tried to persuade her husband to remove these sacred effigies and convert the space into tennis courts. But Lord Ogilvy was superstitious, and being also strong-minded, resisted all her entreaties. She used to make all sorts of fun of the statues, particularly of these two monks, and seldom passed them without some ribald remark. Happening to see the statue of a Grecian lady at a big art sale, she burst out laughing, and turning to her husband, whom, for a wonder, she was accompanying, she exclaimed so loudly that everyone in the hall could hear, "Billy, this is just the very thing we want. We will place her opposite the Franciscans to shock them. I am sure they are alive." Here I must tell you that Lady Ogilvy always declared the monks frowned when she made grimaces at them. But to continue. Although Lord Ogilvy first demurred, he at length gave way, and despite his better judgment, the statue was bought and placed in its present position. A fortnight later, Lady Ogilvy developed alarming signs of a malignant disease, of which no one had had the slightest suspicion, and in 6 weeks she was dead. Her husband left the place and went abroad, and the Macraes, who took it, speedily discovered it was haunted in the most disgusting and revolting way. "Did they leave solely on account of the manifestations?" I inquired. "Yes," Miss Drew replied, "for no other reason, and the abbey has been tenantless since. An old couple, retainers of the family, act as caretakers, coming early every morning and leaving as soon as it begins to get dusk. Not even a dog will pass through these gates after twilight. So come, let us go over the building while it is day." It was a colossal place, with lichen-covered walls, mullioned windows, passages, oak floors, and tapestry everywhere. Under the guidance of the caretaker and his wife, we explored every nook and cranny, and I had a tolerably good idea of my surroundings when the front door closed and I found myself the sole occupant. Both Miss South and Miss Drew were most anxious that I should have someone with me, but I never accept a promiscuous companion, as experience has taught me that unless I know the person well, so many unpleasant things may happen. Under ordinary circumstances, the caretakers would have remained there till 5, but I preferred to be alone, and as Miss South had obtained leave for me to do so as I liked, this was easily arranged. They left at 2. I used one of the kitchens as my dining room, and had luncheon, tea and supper there, and commenced my vigilance in one of the front reception rooms at 9. The loneliness of the place is better, perhaps, imagined than described. The vast halls and rooms, full of sombre furniture, the broad creaking staircases, the long tortuous corridors, were all dominated by an abnormal silence, and a darkness suggestive of 1,001 grim possibilities. Wherever I trod, the sound of my steps awoke the hollowest echoes, while the feeble flickering flame of my candle called into existence every species of grotesque shadow. The knowledge that I might at any second be surprised kept me constantly on the qui-vive. As I walked to the room where I had decided to hold my vigil, every doorway in turn, every angle of the wall, made my heart beat fast. Though my reconnoitre with the statues in the garden and Miss Drew's conversation had convinced me that the hauntings were directly associated with the late Lady Ogilvy, I could, of course, come to no definitive conclusion as to the exact form the manifestations would take. The ghost might be a phantom of the dead, or it might be a vice elemental, i.e. spirit that had never inhabited an earthly body, but which had been attracted to the house by the animal thoughts of Lady Ogilvy. From the hints Miss Drew had thrown out, I gathered that, whichever it was, phantom of the dead or elemental, it was repulsive, particularly repulsive. Hence, my anticipations were not of the most cheerful order, and they grew worse and worse as the moments sped slowly by. The room in which I commenced my watch was of large dimensions and rectangular in shape. It had 2 doors, both of which I kept open. The one led into a series of other rooms, all of a more or less similar size, and the other into the entrance hall. I placed my chair in such a position that I commanded a full view of both. In one hand I held a pocket searchlight, in the other a magazine revolver loaded with shot. To guard against any lunarary deception, for moonbeams often produce strange effects, I closed the shutters and, blowing out my candle, sat in pitch darkness. It is very rarely one gets absolute silence, and in this huge deserted building, the jarring of a door, the rattling of a loose window frame, trivial enough noises in the daytime, were enormously emphasised, and as every now and then the wind came rustling through the open doorways, it assumed the most startling dimensions. The dismal screech of a night bird as it flapped its way past the windows of my room made me spring to my feet in terror, a sure sign, as I afterwards reasoned, that it was nothing psychic, while the fall of a brick in the chimney prepared me for a whole legion of fiery devils. At 10 o'clock I heard a sound like a soft and protracted sigh that, coming from my immediate rear, floated round me and then died in the direction of the inner room. I attribute it to some peculiar nocturnal insect. An hour later a bat created a regular pandemonium in the air, while a stealthy footstep in the hall proved itself to be nothing more or less than an affectionate tabby, presumably the caretaker's, that, stealing slyly towards me, landed on my knees with inconsiderate abruptness. After this incident, which, to say the least of it, was exciting, there was a welcome lull, broken only by the unmistakable murmurings of the wind. An 8-day clock in a faraway portion of the abbey solemnly tolled 12, and its final stroke had hardly ceased reverberating before a change in the atmosphere subtly manifested itself, and I was cognizant of the arrival of the unknown. The darkness around me was no longer pure, unadulterated gloom, but there was amalgamated with it a something all the more alarming because it was vague. A thrill ran through me, and bracing myself up with a desperate effort, I determined to face what was coming with a calm, analytical mind. A terrific crash, as if several tons of crockery had fallen on a tiled floor, sounded from the kitchen. For 1 second my heart stood still, and then recommenced beating with sickly throbs. Nothing further happening, I gradually pulled myself together, and was congratulating myself when suddenly a most appalling bang came from behind me, and the window shutters flew violently back on their hinges. I endeavoured to turn round to ascertain the cause of this demonstration, but I could not. I was enthralled, spellbound, paralytic, and had to sit bolt upright, with my eyes glued fixedly before me. A faint tapping sound now arose somewhere overhead. It grew more and more distinct until I construed it into footsteps, the footsteps, so I imagined, of a woman in very high heels. Nearer and nearer it came until it reached the head of the main staircase, which it straightway began to descend. All this time the cat, which was still on my knees, evinced the greatest terror. Uttering an odd mixture of a mew and a groan, it burrowed its head into the lappets of my coat, and I could plainly feel the vibrations of its heart through my clothes. Nor was I in a much happier condition. The most ungovernable fear took possession of me, and as my mind filled with horrible anticipation of what I might see at any second, I strained every nerve and muscle to escape. Down, 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 3 steps, 2, 1, 1. It was now actually on a level with me and moving across the hall in my direction. Still I saw nothing, thank heaven. Nothing as yet. What was that? A sudden dissipation of the inky blackness directly ahead of me. A luminous something, now blue, now white. Is it a phantom of Lady Ogilvy, a ghastly caricature of the dead? Or my conjectures are interrupted, the thing suddenly takes shape, and I see, tripping towards me in devilish mockery of the living, is a hellish skeleton. A skeleton with long hair and mincing walk, its eye sockets aglow with lurid light, its limbs bathed in phosphorescent glitter. Attached to it was an atmosphere of foulness and decay, so pungent and so penetrating that the fumes swept up my nostrils and all but made me vomit. Again I essayed to rise. I prayed to heaven to help me move, but to no avail. The inevitable was before me. Nearer and nearer it came, and always with the same elegant, extremely elegant tap, tap, tap. I have hated the very sight of high heels ever since. It entered my room. It came straight towards me. I retched, I choked, I gurgled, and by a merciful providence shut my eyes. An icy, and something more than icy, something unthinkable, unnameable, rushed through me. I opened my eyes again, and the horror was bending over me. What followed I do not know. The shock was so great that I swooned, and on recovering consciousness the thing was gone. I got up and, impelled by an irresistible fascination, opened the window and climbed into the garden. It was a bright moonlit night, and I had no difficulty in finding my way to the Grecian statue. As I was gazing at it, the tapping recommenced, this time loud and bell-like in the crisp frosty air. I looked. I could not help myself, and there coming towards me were 3 figures, 2 grey-clad hooded monks with gleaming white faces and scowling brows, and in their midst the skeleton whom, in spite of its furious and frantic struggles, they were ruthlessly dragging forward. Impelling their prisoner towards the spot where I stood, they halted exactly opposite the statues of the monks. Then, seizing the skeleton by its fleshless arms, they forced it on its knees. There was a strong vibrating motion of its bones which continued for perhaps a minute, and the expiration of which time there were issued from its distended and motionless jaws a voice too hideous to describe. Never indeed, even in my wildest flights of imagination, had I conceived such a voice that, apart from being harsh and discordant, was graphically bestial, suggestive of everything that was dead and damnable. Overcome with horror, I reeled against the statue of the Grecian lady. As I did so, the figures vanished. This, I thought, was quite enough for one night. Quitting the garden precincts with the utmost speed, I hastened to the nearest village. I am quite certain I remarked to Miss South the next day that the skeleton was the phantom of Lady Ogilvy, earthbound through vices of which even Miss Drew had no idea. Every night she is dragged from her grave and compelled to do penance by the elementals impersonating the 2 Franciscan monks, whose images afforded Lady Ogilvy such unholy amusement. Remove the Grecian lady from the premises, and the hauntings will cease. At least, that is my idea. Miss South communicated the result of my visit to Lord Ogilvy. His lordship adopted my suggestion, and the Abbey is no longer haunted. Whether her ladyship's earthbound soul is doing penance elsewhere is, however, another question. Many thanks for listening to episode 36 of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and that I'm not too rusty after my extended break. Until next time, happy Halloween, please stay safe and stay spooky.